Hey guys, tonight we are heading back a few centuries to dusty roads and sun-baked fields where the Ottoman Empire kept itself stitched together, not with smartphones or Wi-Fi routers, but with braying, stubborn, and weirdly charming donkeys. You can almost hear their hooves clicking against uneven cobblestones as the world's mail gets carried. Scrolls tucked neatly into saddlebags that probably smelled faintly of hay and onions. Imagine, instead of a chirping inbox notification, you're waiting 2 weeks for a donkey to shuffle up to your town gate. Honestly, you probably wouldn't survive this system if Amazon Prime is already testing your patience. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening somewhere unusual, maybe in a tiny apartment in New York or a hammock in Manila, drop your location and the local time in the comments. I always love seeing where in the world you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the edge of a road that stretches so far, you can't quite see where it bends into the hills. The smell is a mixture of dust, leather, and the faint musk of animals. In the Ottoman Empire, stretching across 3 continents at its height, the need for communication was colossal. Orders had to move from Istanbul's palace chambers out to forts in the Balkans, trading towns in Arabia and coastal ports buzzing with sailors. And for this colossal task, donkeys. Not the most glamorous workforce, but the most reliable when roads grew steep, muddy, or just plain non-existent. Horses might outrun them, camels might carry more, but donkeys were the SUVs of the empire. Stubborn, durable, and somehow always starting up again after a rest. A mainstream historical fact here, the Ottomans formalized a postal relay system called the ulak, which relied on stations where fresh animals and riders could switch out. Historians still argue whether donkeys were officially part of the ulak network, or whether they filled in the gaps on rural, unofficial routes. But regardless, in the hills of Anatolia and the winding paths of the Levant, donkeys carried the daily hum of messages, receipts, and orders. Picture a village boy tying a sealed note into a small pouch, handing it to a wiry courier. The donkey twitches its ears unimpressed, as though wondering why humans can't just yell their news across the valley. Quirky tidbit. Some records suggest certain donkeys became locally famous, nicknamed for their habits. One Muppet apparently was called Sleepy Eyes because he always looked ready for a nap, though he carried messages faster than anyone expected. Maybe that donkey just knew the power of pacing himself. You take a step closer, the ground crunching beneath your shoes. You can see how this system is less about speed and more about endurance. And while modern minds imagine postal systems as efficient grids, here it feels more like a breathing organism. Routes flexing with the weather, with tribal negotiations, with the patience of whichever donkey had been saddled that morning. If you were waiting for urgent war news, you might pace nervously, ears pricked for the clop of hooves. If you were waiting for a cousin's wedding invitation, well, you probably assumed it would get there whenever it got there. And here's where your gentle sarcasm kicks in. Imagine explaining to an Ottoman scribe that in your century, people will rage if an emoji doesn't load instantly. They'd probably pat you on the shoulder, hand you a carrot, and suggest you calm down like they're donkeys. You're still walking now, hearing the bray of a distant animal echo against the stone walls of a nearby inn. The donkey itself looks unimpressed by history, content to flick its tail at flies. You realize that much of the empire's bureaucracy, the flow of taxes, laws, decrees, even love letters, was balanced precariously on the backs of creatures that would happily stop to munch grass at the roadside if you let them. As the first section closes, you're settled into the rhythm of hooves, the idea that great empires didn't always run on drama or battles, but on something far slower, quieter, and, let's admit it, a bit boring. Which, lucky for us, is exactly what helps you drift off tonight. The morning light comes in pale and almost hesitant, stretching across the tiled rooftops of a small Ottoman town. You're already awake, because let's be honest, the donkeys made sure of that with their impatient braying. The couriers are stirring too, tying their belts, shaking the sleep from their eyes and coaxing their animals into motion. This is the world of caravan bells at dawn, where the rhythm of a postal day begins not with alarm clocks, but with the metallic jingle of tiny brass bells swinging from donkey necks. You watch a man dip his hands into a basin of cold water, splash his face, then whistle softly as he checks the straps on his donkey's saddle. Each pack is adjusted carefully, scrolls wrapped in waxed leather, a few parcels tied with rope, maybe even a loaf of bread tucked in for a mid-journey snack. It's strangely domestic, like watching someone pack a lunchbox. Except this lunchbox also contains the Sultan's tax receipts and a report from some frontier fortress. The mainstream historical fact here: by the 16th century, the Ottoman postal system had hundreds of relay stations called menzils, scattered along major roads. These stations offered fresh animals, food, and beds. Couriers would often begin their days at such a post, trading news with others, adjusting their loads, and grabbing a quick bite before setting out. Donkeys might not have been glamorous, but they were steady companions on the stretches where horses faltered. Historians still argue whether donkey bells were purely functional, helping travelers avoid collisions in foggy valleys, or whether they also carried a symbolic weight, like announcing, "Here comes the post, make way." One quirky tidbit: some couriers deliberately tied bells of mismatched tones to create little melodies as they walked. Imagine hearing a donkey shuffle past, chiming out something that sounded faintly like a lullaby or a market tune. A traveling soundtrack, courtesy of stubborn hooves and jingling brass. You trail behind the caravan now, the air filled with a mixture of roasting coffee from a roadside brazier and the tang of donkey sweat. A few couriers trade jokes. One says he dreamt his donkey had wings last night, which would have been nice for crossing rivers, he grumbles, patting the animal's shaggy side. Another teases that his beast is faster asleep than awake, suggesting he should just deliver mail in the donkey's dreams instead. It's early, and humor is their best fuel before caffeine takes hold. The donkeys themselves are not in a hurry. They shift weight from hoof to hoof, shake their manes, and sometimes refuse to budge until coaxed with a firm tug or a morsel of bread. You can't help but smile. These are not sleek racehorses pounding the ground. They're patient workers who know that no empire can truly rush. As the sun creeps higher, you fall into the steady cadence of bells, hooves, and human footsteps. It's hypnotic, almost musical. You notice how the caravan blends into the environment. Dust rising, birds calling, villagers waving lazily as they pass. Some children chase the donkeys for a few yards, giggling until their parents call them back. The couriers wave but don't stop. The rhythm is too precious to break, and you, walking quietly in the line, realize that communication in this world is both grand and fragile. One misplaced pouch, one stubborn donkey, and messages could be delayed for weeks. Yet somehow the system worked well enough that royal orders could travel from Istanbul to Damascus in a matter of days. Not bad for hooves and bells. Here's your gentle modern aside. Think of your phone buzzing in the morning with 20 unread emails. Now imagine if each email arrived with a deliberate clop of hooves and the faint clang of a bell. Honestly, you'd probably turn off notifications forever. The air is warming now, and with it comes the subtle tension of the day ahead. Everyone knows the road will be long, dusty, and occasionally dangerous. But for this moment, as bells jingle and donkeys snort softly, there's a calm ritual in the beginning. A new day of carrying the Empire's secrets, one bray at a time. The road stretches out before you, long and stubborn, like the donkeys themselves. Dust clings to your sandals as you follow the caravan deeper into Anatolia, that rugged heartland of the Ottoman world. The hills are rolling, patched with vineyards and olive groves, the occasional stone house tucked into a bend in the valley. It's beautiful, but it's also the kind of beauty that comes with blisters, because these roads don't smooth themselves. Every step feels uneven, like history itself is nudging you sideways. The donkeys don't mind. Their hooves crunch rhythmically on the gravel, perfectly suited for this kind of travel. Horses might stumble. Wheels would definitely crack on these paths, but donkeys, oh, they thrive here. You watch one pause, nose to the ground, before being nudged forward again by its courier. The animal looks back at him as if to say, "Fine, but only because I was already planning to move." That's donkeys for you. Never in a rush, but never truly stopping either. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Ottoman road system was not a uniform grid. It was a patchwork of ancient Roman roads, Byzantine tracks, and dirt paths beaten down by centuries of trade. Couriers adapted to what was available. Historians still argue whether the empire ever truly invested in upgrading roads for the postal donkeys, or whether they simply let the animals and men make do. What's clear is that communication depended on improvisation. Smooth marble in one stretch, ankle-twisting stones in the next. A quirky tidbit. Travelers often describe donkeys as having a sixth sense for danger on the road. Some claim these animals could smell loose stones or anticipate a sudden drop-off before the rider even saw it. Was it true, or just the kind of myth you tell yourself while nervously clinging to a cliffside path? Hard to say, but as you watch one donkey step delicately around a sharp rock, you can see why the story's stuck. The caravan moves slowly, weaving between tiny villages. You hear chickens clucking, women calling out greetings, children darting into the road only to be shooed back by their mothers. The couriers nod politely but rarely stop. Every minute counts, though not in the frantic way of today's rush. It's more like water steadily dripping into a basin. One drop won't fill it, but hours later it's brimming. That's how the Ottoman Empire kept its veins alive. Plodding, patient, dependable. The heat builds as the morning wears on. Sweat beads at your temples. One courier pulls out a fig from his pack, bites into it, and casually offers a piece to his donkey. The animal chews it slowly, eyes half-lidded, as if appreciating the gift of sugar. You can't help but laugh quietly. Half the empire's mail is moving forward because donkeys are bribed with snacks. Forget logistics. It's really just lunchtime management. The roads twist higher into the hills now, and with each turn, you catch glimpses of wider landscapes. Rivers glinting in the distance, orchards blooming in spring, or dry scrubland stretching endlessly in summer. You notice how the donkeys adapt, their breathing steady, their pace unchanging. You, however, feel the strain in your calves. Maybe you're not cut out for empire building. And here comes your modern aside. If this were a fitness app, your step counter would be off the charts, but the app would also be yelling, "Hydrate?" Meanwhile, these couriers just shrug, take a sip from a goatskin flask, and keep walking. No step counts, no reminders, just survival. The sun is higher now, the air buzzing with insects, and the caravan finds a rhythm again. Hooves, bells, dust, and the faint creak of leather straps. You realize that the empire's vastness wasn't measured in miles, but in these small, deliberate steps, each one a heartbeat in the life of communication. You are walking not just on a road, but on the fragile thread that kept millions connected. And as the caravan disappears deeper into Anatolia, you catch yourself swaying gently to the rhythm, the monotony of hooves lulling you into something like a trance. Dust rises, bells jingle, and the empire breathes through donkeys. By midday, the caravan has slowed its pace, and you find yourself drifting toward the smell of roasted beans and the promise of shade. This is the lifeline of long journeys. The inns and roadside rest stops where couriers, merchants, and donkeys alike collapse for a few precious hours. Think of them as the Ottoman equivalent of highway gas stations. Though instead of fluorescent lights and bad hot dogs, you get thick coffee poured from copper pots and a breeze that carries gossip from 3 provinces away. The inn you approach is squat and sturdy, its walls made of rough stone, its wooden beams creaking with age. Couriers guide their donkeys into a shaded yard where the animals immediately lower their heads into troughs of cool water. You watch one donkey splash its muzzle noisily, spraying droplets onto its owner's tunic. The man sighs but doesn't scold. After hours of dust and heat, the donkey's little act of rebellion feels deserved. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Ottoman postal network relied heavily on menzilhanes or postal inns, strategically placed along main routes. These stations were more than just pit stops. They were essential hubs where couriers could rest, exchange messages, and swap out tired animals for fresh ones. Historians still argue whether every station offered full lodging or if some were just bare-bones shelters with water and hay. What we do know is that without these waypoints, messages could never have crossed the empire with any regularity. And here's your quirky tidbit. Coffee, introduced into the empire in the 16th century, quickly became a staple for couriers. Some reports suggest they mixed it with honey to make a sticky, energizing paste that could be chewed on the go. Imagine gnawing on a caffeine candy bar while bouncing on a donkey's back. Practical, though perhaps not elegant. You settle onto a wooden bench inside the inn, the air thick with the scent of cardamom coffee. Couriers sit in small clusters, hunched over steaming cups, trading news in hushed tones. One man boasts that his route took him all the way to Aleppo, while another grumbles that bandits nearly stole his saddlebag near Bursa. The jokes fly, too. Someone quips that donkeys are the true rulers of the empire, since sultans can issue decrees, but it's the animals who decide how fast they actually arrive. The room chuckles, and you join in. It's the kind of humor born from tired legs and too many miles. Meanwhile, the donkeys outside enjoy their own version of relaxation. Piles of hay, troughs of grain, and the occasional affectionate scratch behind the ears. One courier ties a blue bead to his donkey's bridle, muttering a prayer against the evil eye. Superstitions cling as tightly to the animals as the dust on their coats. Some believe a donkey with unusually long ears brings good luck, while others insist you must never let your donkey bray before sunrise, or the day will be cursed. The animals, of course, seem blissfully unaware of these expectations. The innkeeper moves from table to table, refilling cups, offering bread, olives, and cheese. You tear into a piece of bread yourself, and it's astonishing how something so simple tastes so rich when paired with travel hunger. The couriers eat quickly, but not frantically. After all, there's always more road waiting. But in this pause, there's camaraderie. Empires may rise and fall, but the comfort of a shared meal on a dusty road remains timeless. Here's your modern aside. You can almost compare this inn to a roadside diner on Route 66. The same blend of locals and travelers, the same coffee poured endlessly, the same jokes about vehicles breaking down. Just swap donkeys for pickup trucks. The pause doesn't last forever. Soon, the couriers are tightening straps again, brushing crumbs from their tunics, and coaxing donkeys back onto their feet. You hear the first jingle of bells as the caravan reforms. The sun is lower now, the shadows longer, and the road calls once more. But for a brief moment, you've seen how even the grand machinery of empire depends on small, ordinary rituals. A sip of coffee, a bite of bread, a donkey splashing water on its rider. These pauses are what keep the endless miles bearable, what turn a dusty road into a story worth retelling. You step back out onto the road, stomach pleasantly full from bread and olives, lips still tingling with the bitter aftertaste of strong Ottoman coffee. The donkeys seem rejuvenated too, ears pricked, hooves steady, the rhythm of their bells returning as couriers begin tightening straps and checking their loads. This, after all, is the true cargo of empire. Not silk or spices, not gold or gems, but words. Scrolls, sealed packets, letters folded with care, each one a tiny lifeline connecting one corner of the Ottoman world to another. You watch as a courier carefully unrolls a scroll before tucking it into a leather tube. The parchment crackles faintly, the ink still fresh enough to smudge if handled carelessly. He ties a red ribbon around the tube, then seals it with wax stamped by an official emblem. One flick of a signet ring, and this fragile roll of paper becomes something untouchable. An order, a decree, a command that could change the fate of hundreds. The donkey blinks at it with total indifference. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Ottoman correspondence was often secured with distinctive tugra seals, elaborate calligraphic signatures representing the Sultan himself. To tamper with such a seal was more than a crime. It was an insult to imperial authority. Historians still argue whether every courier along the route was trained to recognize these seals, or if some simply trusted the chain of custody. Either way, the sanctity of the wax and ribbon mattered more than the speed of delivery. A quirky tidbit? Some smaller villages, far from the bustle of Istanbul, improvised with their own makeshift sealing methods, like pressing the edge of a carved wooden spoon into wax, or even using a child's toy as a stamp. These unofficial seals were recognized locally, if not by the empire's bureaucracy,
Imagine your tax receipt arriving sealed with the impression of a duck-shaped rattle.
Bureaucrats might roll their eyes, but the message still carried. You glance at the saddlebags as they are filled. Each donkey now bears not just weight, but responsibility. Land deeds, marriage contracts, shopping lists, royal edicts, even coded intelligence reports. Some of it grand, some of it painfully mundane. But that's the charm. An empire doesn't run on war alone. It also runs on bills, gossip, and the occasional recipe. The couriers fuss over their bundles, making sure no rain or dust can damage the contents. Layers of leather, cloth, and waxed thread protect the fragile words inside. You hear one courier mutter that his donkey has a bad habit of sitting down suddenly, which once crumpled a set of official registers. "The scribes nearly fainted," he says with a grin. "They thought the empire would collapse because of one donkey's nap." Everyone chuckles, though you suspect there was a grain of truth in that panic. The caravan sets off again, scrolls swaying gently with each step of the donkeys. You fall into rhythm, imagining the journeys these words will take. An order from a provincial governor demanding tax payments, a marriage contract reminding two families of their obligations, a love letter tucked secretly inside a saddlebag, never meant for the Sultan's eyes. Somewhere down the road, someone waits, perhaps impatiently, perhaps with dread, for these very words to arrive. Here's your modern aside. Think of how you guard your phone with passwords, biometrics, two-factor authentication. Now imagine relying on the ears of a donkey to keep your private message safe. The thought is oddly humbling. Less secure maybe, but somehow more human. The donkeys continue steadily, bells chiming softly like punctuation marks on the road. Every scroll is a sentence, every seal a period, every hoofbeat another word in the empire's long, endless story. You walk alongside them, lulled by the idea that history is not just battles and palaces, but a quiet march of sealed packets bouncing gently against a donkey's ribs. The road narrows as the caravan winds through a small valley, the air echoing with the jingling of donkey bells and the occasional grunt of a courier trying to keep his animal moving. By now, you've noticed that the Ottoman system wasn't just about routes, scrolls, and inns. It was also governed by a tangle of rules. Some were practical, some downright peculiar, and some so oddly specific you wonder whether a bureaucrat once had too much free time and too much ink. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Ottoman state had detailed postal regulations, especially during the height of the ulak courier system. Couriers were fined if they delayed or mishandled messages, and animals were carefully weighed to prevent overloading. Historians still argue whether donkeys were ever officially codified in these rules. Horses were usually preferred in legal texts. But rural records suggest that donkeys were indeed bound by similar restrictions, which makes sense. Bureaucracy has a way of roping in even the most stubborn of beasts. One quirky tidbit comes from travelers' accounts. In some regions, officials supposedly set maximum speeds for couriers, not just to ensure timeliness, but to prevent animals from being run to exhaustion. Imagine being fined not because you were late, but because your donkey trotted too slowly, or too quickly. It's as if the empire wanted every courier to find a perfect donkey-approved Goldilocks pace. As you walk along, you hear a courier complain to another. "My donkey was fined last season for stopping too long at a fig orchard. Tell me, who pays the fine, the beast or the man?" The other courier laughs, shaking his head. "The donkey pays with stubbornness. We pay with silver." The group chuckles, though you suspect the fines were very real and often resented. You picture a clerk somewhere, hunched over a desk, tallying up infractions. One delay due to muddy road, one excess weight on left saddlebag, one donkey braying after midnight, disturbing the governor's sleep. It's both absurd and strangely endearing. The empire, in its seriousness, had to grapple with the unpredictability of animals who would happily stop mid-route to scratch an itch on a tree trunk. The couriers themselves developed their own unofficial rules. For instance, many refused to load donkeys with more than half the animal's body weight, not out of mercy, but out of pragmatism. Overburdened donkeys simply refused to move, standing stubbornly in the road until someone redistributed the load. You can almost imagine an Ottoman scribe noting, "New rule, if donkey will not move, reduce load." Practical advice masquerading as policy. Here's your modern aside. Think about how today's workplace rules can feel oddly specific, like no microwaving fish in the office.
You know someone must have done it once to inspire such a regulation.
Same with Ottoman postal rules. You just know some poor governor once received a crumpled, hay-stained decree because a donkey rolled in the dirt. And from then on, rule number 37. Scrolls must be double-wrapped in waxed leather. The caravan keeps plodding, but now you notice how rules shape the journey. Saddles are checked, straps inspected, bells regulated for tone and size. One courier swears that mismatched bells are bad luck. Another insists the law requires uniform chimes, though you're fairly sure he's exaggerating. Still, the debate keeps the group awake, which may have been the point all along. As the sun dips lower, the rules seem less like a burden and more like a rhythm. They keep the donkeys moving, keep the couriers accountable, and somehow keep an empire of millions tied together. You realize that behind every bray and hoofbeat, there's a ledger somewhere recording fines, weights, and speeds. An entire bureaucracy watching over donkeys. And yet, despite all this, the donkeys seem blissfully unaware of the rules. They plod, they bray, they occasionally stop to chew grass, as if to remind everyone that empires can legislate all they like. But the donkey will always have the final say. The road has settled into its familiar rhythm, bells chiming, hooves crunching, dust rising in lazy spirals. By now, you've fallen so deep into the pace that you start noticing the quieter details. The way couriers chew slowly on dried fruit, the way donkeys flick their ears like tiny semaphore flags, the way the group naturally forms and reforms as some walk faster and others lag behind. This is where you begin to see the daily routines that made the postal system tick, not the official rules stamped in ink, but the lived patterns of the men and animals who walked these roads every single day. Your mainstream historical fact here, Ottoman couriers, or ulaks, were often drawn from local populations and were expected to be fit enough to cover long distances on foot or animal back. They lived simple lives, balancing fatigue with discipline. Historians still argue whether they were considered prestigious servants of the state or just disposable labor. Some sources describe them as proud messengers carrying the empire's lifeblood. Others hint at chronic underpayment and constant exhaustion. Quirky tidbit? Some couriers had small, ritualized habits to get through the monotony. One might always eat the same breakfast before leaving. Bread dipped in vinegar, said to sharpen the tongue for speaking clearly. Another swore by carrying garlic cloves, not just as food, but as protection against evil spirits, and maybe against talkative companions. Imagine an entire relay of couriers reeking faintly of garlic, their donkeys probably grateful for the extra fly repellent. You watch as one courier carefully lays out his midday meal on a flat rock. Olives, cheese, a few figs, all eaten in deliberate silence. Another sits cross-legged in the dust, repairing a frayed strap with surprising patience. Their donkeys graze nearby, tails swishing in unison, content to nibble at thorny shrubs that would shred a horse's mouth. Naps are part of the rhythm too. You see a courier lean against his donkey's side, hat pulled over his face, dozing lightly while the animal stands still, almost like a furry pillow. A soft snore escapes him, blending with the background hum of insects. Another courier rolls up his cloak and lies flat under a tree, his donkey cropping grass nearby. These small rests are scattered along the road, never long enough to endanger the schedule, but just enough to keep bodies functioning. The bells are ever present, a soundtrack that never fades. Sometimes they lull you, like wind chimes on a summer porch. Other times, they feel like the dripping of a faucet you can't quite turn off. A courier jokes, "If I ever leave this job, the first thing I'll do is throw a bell into the sea and never listen to one again." Another replies, "And then you'll hear it in your dreams." They laugh, though their eyes suggest the joke hits close to home. Your modern aside? Think of it like being stuck with a car alarm that never stops. Except here, the alarm is your livelihood. And instead of waking the neighbors, it guides your donkey through forests and valleys. Endlessly practical, mildly annoying, oddly comforting. As the day stretches on, the routines blend into something almost meditative. Meals, naps, repairs, jokes, brays, it all circles back, looping like a song you can't quite get out of your head. And in that loop, you start to understand how entire empires functioned. Not through dramatic moments, but through the quiet persistence of people doing the same tasks again and again until they became second nature. The donkeys snort softly, couriers stretch their legs, bells ring on. The empire moves forward,
Not in leaps, not in charges, but in patient, repetitive routines that feel both boring and eternal. And somehow, in that boredom, lies the true magic, a rhythm steady enough to cradle you toward sleep. The caravan reaches a wide river by late afternoon, the water glinting like polished glass under the sun. The donkeys hesitate at the edge, ears twitching nervously, because rivers are not their favorite thing. And honestly, who can blame them? The path you've been walking suddenly breaks off into water that looks deceptively calm, but hides currents strong enough to drag a loaded animal downstream. This is where the job of courier shifts from walking to balancing, coaxing, and occasionally praying. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Ottoman road system had countless bridges, many inherited from Roman or Byzantine times. Some were sturdy stone arches that still stand today, others rickety wooden structures that creaked ominously under the weight of caravans. Where no bridge existed, ferries or fords were used.
Historians still argue whether the empire invested heavily in building new bridges specifically for the postal service, or whether couriers simply relied on whatever infrastructure traders had already carved into the landscape. Either way, crossing water was always a tense but necessary part of the job. Quirky tidbit? In some villages, ferrymen insisted on chanting little rhymes or prayers as they guided donkeys onto rafts, claiming the rhythm soothed the animals. One rhyme supposedly translated to something like, "Step steady, ears ready, hooves on wood, bring us good." Whether the donkeys cared is questionable, but the ferrymen swore by it. Today, your caravan opts for the ferry. You watch as planks are lowered to form a ramp, and the donkeys, suspicious as ever, sniff the boards before stepping gingerly onto the floating platform. The whole structure wobbles, and you feel your stomach do the same. Couriers mutter encouragement, tugging reins gently, while one unlucky man nearly loses his footing when his donkey sneezes mid-step. The raft groans under the combined weight, ropes creak, and then, slowly, it drifts across the river, guided by poles and the steady pull of the current. You grip the railing, listening to the water slap against wood. The donkeys, once settled, stand stoically, tails swishing as if this were just another patch of road. Their bells ring softly with each ripple, creating a strange music over the water. A courier jokes that the empire's messages are now sailing instead of walking, and another quips back that if donkeys had gills, they'd probably be forced to swim mail across too. The laughter breaks some of the tension, though you can see how tightly their hands still clutch the reins. Reaching the opposite bank feels like a small triumph. The donkeys step off the raft one by one, hooves clattering onto solid ground. The couriers breathe a collective sigh of relief, though they try to hide it with gruff remarks. You, however, feel it fully, the joy of dirt underfoot after wobbling over water. But not every crossing is so orderly. Sometimes the caravan must ford directly, wading through shallow but rocky stretches. You watch as a courier points to a calmer bend in the river, leading his donkey in first. The water reaches its knees, then its belly, the animal snorting with every step. Scrolls are clutched tightly against chests, cloaks hitched high to stay dry. One donkey lets out a long bray midstream, as if protesting the whole endeavor. Yet somehow, they all make it across, dripping but determined. Here's your modern aside. Think of this like losing Wi-Fi for a few minutes while your email drafts hang in limbo. That's what a river crossing was to the Ottomans. Momentary disconnection, a suspenseful pause, until you reach the far shore and the messages could flow again. With the river behind them, the caravan trudges onward, feet squelching in damp sandals, saddlebags darker with water stains. But the rhythm returns quickly. Hooves, bells, dust, breath. You realize that in a way, these crossings were not just obstacles, but rituals. Each one reminded couriers that communication was fragile, that words were always one slippery plank away from being swept downstream. The sun lowers, the water glows gold, and the donkeys once again prove that empires don't move on courage or drama, but on steady steps across shaky bridges. The air is cooler now, evening shadows stretching across the road, when a courier pulls a leather tube from his saddlebag and taps it against his palm. "This one," he says softly, "goes to the governor's house in Konya by sunrise." His voice is serious, and suddenly you feel the weight of what's being carried, not just parchment, but decisions, decrees, lives altered by ink and wax.
The donkeys keep walking, oblivious, as though they're just hauling figs to market. But in reality, the scrolls bouncing at their sides carry the empire's pulse. Messages of war and peace, of taxes and treaties, of births and deaths. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Ottoman postal routes carried every type of correspondence, from imperial decrees sealed with the Sultan's tugra to mundane tax receipts. Critical military dispatches often had priority, moving faster through relay stations than everyday mail. Historians still argue whether secret intelligence, spy reports, coded messages, was formally integrated into the postal system, or if it traveled through separate channels. Either way, donkeys played their part, trotting steadily with both mundane and monumental news. A quirky tidbit: some local governors were notorious for sneaking their personal shopping lists into official dispatches. One recorded example included orders for candied almonds, rosewater, and an especially fine kind of soap. Imagine a weary courier arriving after 3 days on the road, only to deliver an urgent military packet that turned out to be dessert supplies. You wonder if the donkey rolled its eyes. The caravan presses on, and you begin to imagine the kinds of messages each saddlebag might hold. One donkey carries news of a treaty that could bring peace to a border region. Another hauls an execution order sealed in crimson wax. A third might have nothing more thrilling than a merchant's invoice for 2 bolts of silk. The donkeys, of course, carry them all the same way, patiently, evenly, with no distinction between empire-shaking news and shopping errands. The couriers talk about this sometimes. One says he once delivered an order mobilizing troops to a fortress, only to later discover that his companion had carried on the very same day an invitation to a wedding feast. War and weddings, the man shrugs. The donkeys don't care which one they bring. For them, it's just another walk. Your modern aside, it's like when you open your email and see a message from your boss right next to a discount coupon for socks. Both arrive instantly, both clutter the same inbox. The Ottoman couriers just had a slower, dustier version of the same experience. You keep walking, and the evening deepens. Somewhere ahead, a governor might be pacing anxiously, waiting for news of a battle. Somewhere else, a bride's family might be arranging flowers, wondering whether the invitations will arrive in time. And in between, here you are, listening to the bells and watching the donkeys trudge along, carrying both futures and frivolities side by side. One courier pats his donkey's flank and murmurs, "This beast has carried more secrets than any minister." And he's right. These animals, stubborn and steady, were silent custodians of everything from military campaigns to the price of onions. You realize, with a kind of drowsy awe, that the empire's stories were written not just by scribes in palaces, but also by the sway of scrolls against a donkey's ribs. The night draws closer. Stars appear above, faint at first, then brighter, as if they too are tiny messages flickering across the sky. The caravan does not stop. Urgent words, everyday notes, royal commands, all continue forward on hooves and bells, traveling deeper into the dark. Darkness deepens as the caravan keeps moving. Torches flickering here and there, their smoke curling lazily into the cool air. The road is quieter now, and you can tell fatigue is setting in. This is the hour when couriers lean on stories to stay awake, and donkeys seem to tune into the human voices, plodding more steadily when there's chatter in the night. Welcome to the world of folk tales along the road. Equal parts entertainment, superstition, and survival strategy. Your mainstream historical fact here: oral storytelling was deeply woven into Ottoman culture, from city coffee houses where metas, public storytellers, performed, to rural roads where travelers swapped tales to pass the hours. Historians still argue whether couriers had a repertoire of specifically postal legends, or whether they simply recycled the broader pool of local myths and fables. Either way, the long stretches of night made storytelling as necessary as food or water. Quirky tidbit: some routes became so associated with certain tales that they were nicknamed after them. One stretch in Anatolia was jokingly called the Ogre's Road, because couriers swore the same scary folktale about a hungry giant was told every single time they crossed it. You can imagine the donkeys sighing, "Oh no, not this story again." Tonight, you hear one courier clear his throat and begin. His donkey trudges beside him, ears flicking in time with his words. He tells of a farmer who once tried to trick his donkey into thinking it could sing. The farmer tied bells and ribbons to the animal, paraded it through town, and claimed it would perform a song at sunset. Of course, when the moment came, The donkey only brayed loudly. The townsfolk laughed, and the farmer lost his wager. The lesson? The courier grins. Donkeys don't care about your dreams of glory. The group chuckles softly, though one man adds, "Still, that bray was probably better than half the singers in the market." Another courier shares a more somber tale. A ghostly woman in white who wanders the roads, asking travelers for letters to deliver. If you hand her an envelope, she disappears into mist. The legend goes that the letter will reach its destination, but the recipient will have unsettling dreams for weeks afterward. The donkeys, unimpressed, munch grass at the roadside while the men murmur, "God forbid," under their breath. You walk along, lulled by the cadence of voices. The stories weave into the night air, blending with the soft clink of bells and the crunch of hooves. The donkeys seem oddly soothed, as though the human voices reassure them that this long road still has company. Here's your modern aside. It's like listening to a podcast on a road trip. Only here, instead of earbuds, the sound drifts openly into the night, keeping both couriers and donkeys alert. The tales shift from serious to silly. One courier insists he once saw a donkey outpace a horse during a thunderstorm, claiming the beast was powered by lightning fear. Another swears his animal understands Turkish commands better than his own children do. Laughter rises, echoing across the hills, and for a brief stretch, the exhaustion seems to lift. You notice how these stories are not just entertainment, they're glue. They bind the couriers together, making them a family of sorts, bound by shared miles and shared words. They remind each other that no one walks these endless roads entirely alone. Even the donkeys, with their patient ears and occasional brays, become part of the conversation. Silent but essential listeners. As the road unwinds beneath your feet, the voices continue, stories piling on stories, until the night feels layered with them, like blankets against the chill. Empires may rely on decrees and seals, but human hearts rely on tales. And in this moment, somewhere between exhaustion and laughter, you realize that both are equally vital for the journey. The sun rises again, warm light spilling over the hills, and you notice the caravan slowing down for an entirely different reason: donkey care. These animals may seem endlessly patient, but even empires must pause to brush, feed, and fuss over the very creatures that carried their lifeblood. You step closer and watch as couriers begin their routines of grooming, feeding, and, yes, whispering little charms to their beasts, because superstition rode the roads as firmly as any saddle. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Donkeys were prized in Ottoman rural life for their endurance and ability to navigate rough terrain. They could carry between 60 and 80 kilograms with steady determination. Historians still argue whether the imperial court ever gave official recognition to postal donkeys. Horses were celebrated far more in state records, but local archives and folk accounts confirm that these humble animals were the backbone of regional communication. Quirky tidbit. Some couriers swore by rubbing olive oil into their donkeys' hooves to keep them supple and prevent cracking. Others claimed garlic paste rubbed on the ears kept away both flies and evil spirits. You watch as one man carefully smooths oil along his donkey's hooves, muttering, "May your steps be steady, may your road be smooth." His companion teases him, "Or may your beast slip and blame you anyway." The donkey flicks an ear, unimpressed. The grooming itself is oddly soothing. Brushes scrape across shaggy coats, dust rising in faint golden clouds. The donkeys lean into the strokes, eyes half closing, tails swishing lazily. One courier picks burrs from his donkey's mane, humming under his breath. Another ties a small blue bead to the saddle strap, protection against the evil eye. You catch whispers of other beliefs too. Donkeys with black coats were thought to ward off misfortune, while pale-coated ones might attract envy. The couriers argue half-seriously about which color is luckier, while the animals munch grass, oblivious to their supposed mystical qualities. You notice the bond between man and animal here. It's not the dramatic loyalty of a knight and his warhorse. It's quieter, grittier, built from long days and countless shared miles. A courier pats his donkey's side and says, "You know more secrets than I do, old friend." Another strokes his animal's nose before fastening the bridle, murmuring, "Don't bite the scribe again." Yes, apparently one donkey had developed a taste for snapping at officials who got too close. Here's your modern aside. It's not so different from people today fussing over their cars. Polishing headlights, hanging lucky charms from mirrors, insisting on certain brands of motor oil. Only here, the vehicle occasionally brays in protest and refuses to start until it's given a fig. The caravan lingers a little longer than usual this morning because donkey care is not something you rush. One courier even sprinkles a pinch of salt onto the ground, claiming it strengthens the animal's spirit. Another hangs a tiny scrap of cloth dyed red from the saddlebag. Bright colors were thought to deflect envy. You marvel at how much symbolic weight rides alongside the literal weight of scrolls and parcels. Once brushed, oiled, and charmed, the donkeys seem lighter, more willing to move. Their ears flick alertly, their hooves strike the road with renewed energy. The couriers, too, seem brighter, stretching their shoulders as though refreshed by the ritual. You realize that donkey care isn't just for the animals, it's for the men as well. A pause that reminds them of companionship, of patience, of the small joys hidden in dust and distance. And so the road resumes, the bells ringing once more. But now you hear them differently. Not just as background noise, but as proof of care, proof of bonds. Each jingle says someone groomed this animal, someone tied that charm, someone whispered a prayer before stepping forward again. Empires may be written in ink and stone, but here, in the soft breath of a donkey and the gentle scrape of a brush, you glimpse the quiet heartbeat that kept them alive. The air is cooler now, evening shadows stretching across the road, when a courier pulls a leather tube from his saddlebag and taps it against his palm. "This one," he says softly, "goes to the governor's house in Konya by sunrise." His voice is serious, and suddenly you feel the weight of what's being carried. Not just parchment, but decisions, decrees, lives altered by ink and wax. The donkeys keep walking, oblivious, as though they're just hauling figs to market. But in reality, the scrolls bouncing at their sides carry the empire's pulse. Messages of war and peace, of taxes and treaties, of births and deaths. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Ottoman postal routes carried every type of correspondence, from imperial decrees sealed with the Sultan's tugra to mundane tax receipts. Critical military dispatches often had priority, moving faster through relay stations than everyday mail. Historians still argue whether secret intelligence, spy reports, coded messages, was formally integrated into the postal system, or if it traveled through separate channels. Either way, donkeys played their part, trotting steadily with both mundane and monumental news. A quirky tidbit: some local governors were notorious for sneaking their personal shopping list into official dispatches. One recorded example included orders for candied almonds, rosewater, and an especially fine kind of soap. Imagine a weary courier arriving after 3 days on the road, only to deliver an urgent military packet that turned out to be dessert supplies. You wonder if the donkey rolled its eyes. The caravan presses on, and you begin to imagine the kinds of messages each saddlebag might hold. One donkey carries news of a treaty that could bring peace to a border region. Another hauls an execution order sealed in crimson wax. A third might have nothing more thrilling than a merchant's invoice for 2 bolts of silk. The donkeys, of course, carry them all the same way, patiently, evenly, with no distinction between empire-shaking news and shopping errands. The couriers talk about this sometimes. One says he once delivered an order mobilizing troops to a fortress, only to later discover that his companion had carried, on the very same day, an invitation to a wedding feast. War and weddings. The man shrugs. The donkeys don't care which one they bring. For them, it's just another walk. Your modern aside, it's like when you open your email and see a message from your boss right next to a discount coupon for socks. Both arrive instantly, both clutter the same inbox. The Ottoman couriers just had a slower, dustier version of the same experience. You keep walking, and the evening deepens. Somewhere ahead, a governor might be pacing anxiously, waiting for news of a battle. Somewhere else, a bride's family might be arranging flowers, wondering whether the invitations will arrive in time. And in between, here you are, listening to the bells and watching the donkeys trudge along, carrying both futures and frivolities side by side. One courier pats his donkey's flank and murmurs, "This beast has carried more secrets than any minister." And he's right. These animals, stubborn and steady, were silent custodians of everything from military campaigns to the price of onions. You realize, with a kind of drowsy awe, that the empire's stories were written not just by scribes in palaces, but also by the sway of scrolls against a donkey's ribs. The night draws closer. Stars appear above, faint at first, then brighter, As if they too are tiny messages flickering across the sky. The caravan does not stop. Urgent words, everyday notes, royal commands, all continue forward on hooves and bells, traveling deeper into the dark. The road stretches on, but not every step is as steady as the couriers would like. By mid-afternoon, the caravan faces what everyone dreads, the unpredictability of travel. Donkeys stumble, straps snap, storms roll in, and sometimes the Empire's precious messages end up soggy, delayed, or, worst of all, completely misplaced. These are the moments that never make it into grand chronicles. But they are the ones that keep couriers muttering under their breath and historians scratching their heads. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Despite the Ottoman ulak system being impressively organized for its time, delays were frequent. Roads washed out in heavy rains, mountain passes were blocked by snow, and rivers swelled too high to cross. Historians still argue whether the empire's bureaucracy was forgiving of these inevitable setbacks or whether couriers bore the brunt of punishment for things beyond their control. Either way, the smooth image of imperial communication often hit a bumpy reality. Quirky tidbit? Some couriers swore by carrying little clay tablets in their saddlebags, marked with prayers or protective symbols. The idea was that if messages were lost or ruined, at least the charm would preserve their honor. One even claimed a donkey once returned on its own after being spooked and bolting into the woods, scrolls intact, charm dangling, as though the animal understood its duty better than its master. Was it true? Hard to say. But the couriers told and retold the tale whenever someone's bag went missing. You see it firsthand now, a courier tugging anxiously at a saddle strap that has slipped loose. The scrolls sway precariously, one nearly tumbling into the dirt before he catches it. Another curses softly as his donkey simply stops in the middle of the path, refusing to budge. "Lost a day like this once," he mutters, tugging harder. Beast stood still till the moon rose. Whole town waited for news, and what did they get? Nothing but silence. The donkey naturally looks smug. Storms bring their own chaos. Dark clouds roll in, lightning forks across the sky, and fat drops of rain begin to fall. You can feel the parchment inside the bags growing damp despite the waxed leather wrappings. The couriers hunch their shoulders, quickening their pace. But there's only so much you can do when nature decides to test you. Bells jingle unevenly in the rain, a strange, muffled rhythm that feels like a lullaby gone off beat. One man shouts over the downpour that he once lost a packet completely. It slipped into a swollen stream and vanished. "Probably ended up in the sea," he says bitterly. Another replies, "Or in a fisherman's fire, heating his dinner." The group laughs, but it's the nervous kind of laughter, the kind you use to soften the sting of memory. Here's your modern aside. It's the historical equivalent of your email disappearing into the void of cyberspace. No error message, no explanation, just gone. You hit send, and somewhere between here and there, the message simply evaporates. Only in this case, the missing file isn't a spreadsheet. It might be a royal decree. No pressure. As the storm eases, the caravan trudges forward again. Clothes cling damply, donkeys shake themselves like oversized dogs, and couriers sigh in relief. One scroll may be smudged, another pouch water-stained, but most of the messages survive. The Empire can breathe again. And yet you realize that these delays and mishaps weren't failures. They were part of the rhythm. A letter that took 3 days might sometimes take 7. A governor might stew in silence for a week, only to finally receive his order and grumble, "Well, better late than never." Empires were vast, yes, but they were also patient in ways we can hardly imagine today. The donkeys plod on, unfazed, as if to remind everyone, messages will come when they come. The bells ring once more, steady and sure, and the Empire's heartbeat, though slowed by rain and stubbornness, carries on. The air is cooler now, evening shadows stretching across the road, when a courier pulls a leather tube from his saddlebag and taps it against his palm. "This one," he says softly, "goes to the governor's house in Konya by sunrise." His voice is serious, and suddenly you feel the weight of what's being carried. Not just parchment, but decisions, decrees, lives altered by ink and wax. The donkeys keep walking, oblivious, as though they're just hauling figs to market. But in reality, the scrolls bouncing at their sides carry the Empire's pulse. Messages of war and peace, of taxes and treaties, of births and deaths. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Ottoman postal routes carried every type of correspondence, from imperial decrees sealed with the Sultan's tugra to mundane tax receipts. Critical military dispatches often had priority, moving faster through relay stations than everyday mail. Historians still argue whether secret intelligence, spy reports, coded messages, was formally integrated into the postal system or if it traveled through separate channels. Either way, donkeys played their part, trotting steadily with both mundane and monumental news. A quirky tidbit: some local governors were notorious for sneaking their personal shopping lists into official dispatches. One recorded example included orders for candied almonds, rosewater, and an especially fine kind of soap. Imagine a weary courier arriving after 3 days on the road, only to deliver an urgent military packet that turned out to be dessert supplies. You wonder if the donkey rolled its eyes. The caravan presses on, and you begin to imagine the kinds of messages each saddlebag might hold. One donkey carries news of a treaty that could bring peace to a border region. Another hauls an execution order sealed in crimson wax. A third might have nothing more thrilling than a merchant's invoice for 2 bolts of silk. The donkeys, of course, carry them all the same way, patiently, evenly, with no distinction between empire-shaking news and shopping errands. The couriers talk about this sometimes. One says he once delivered an order mobilizing troops to a fortress, only to later discover that his companion had carried, on the very same day, an invitation to a wedding feast. War and weddings, the man shrugs. The donkeys don't care which one they bring. For them, it's just another walk. Your modern aside, it's like when you open your email and see a message from your boss right next to a discount coupon for socks. Both arrive instantly, both clutter the same inbox. The Ottoman couriers just had a slower, dustier version of the same experience. You keep walking and the evening deepens. Somewhere ahead, a governor might be pacing anxiously, waiting for news of a battle. Somewhere else, a bride's family might be arranging flowers, wondering whether the invitations will arrive in time. And in between, here you are, listening to the bells and watching the donkeys trudge along, carrying both futures and frivolities side by side. One courier pats his donkey's flank and murmurs, "This beast has carried more secrets than any minister." And he's right. These animals, stubborn and steady, were silent custodians of everything from military campaigns to the price of onions. You realize, with a kind of drowsy awe, that the empire's stories were written not just by scribes in palaces, but also by the sway of scrolls against a donkey's ribs. The night draws closer. Stars appear above, faint at first, then brighter, as if they too are tiny messages flickering across the sky. The caravan does not stop. Urgent words, everyday notes, royal commands, all continue forward on hooves and bells, traveling deeper into the dark. The sky is clear again, the road drying in the sun, when a courier walking beside you leans closer and says, "You know, it's not just us. Everyone wants to carry messages. We've got rivals." You glance at the donkeys, who flick their ears as if offended at the very suggestion. But he's right. Ottoman communication was never the monopoly of donkey caravans alone. Horses, camels, even pigeons had their place, and each came with its own quirks, strengths, and failures. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Ulak courier system primarily relied on horses for speed across long distances, especially along the empire's main arteries. Camels dominated desert routes, their ability to endure heat and scarcity unmatched. Donkeys, humble and uncelebrated, thrived where terrain was too steep, rocky, or narrow for either of their more glamorous cousins. Historians still argue whether donkeys were considered official postal animals or just the fallback option, though their ubiquity in rural areas suggests they were indispensable, no matter what the ledgers said. Quirky tidbit: carrier pigeons were occasionally used for urgent, lightweight messages, particularly in military contexts. One Ottoman general supposedly complained that his pigeons refused to fly home if fed too well before release. "They grow lazy," he grumbled, and prefer to nap on rooftops instead of saving the empire. Imagine losing a war update because your bird decided it was siesta time. You hear the couriers debate as they walk. One argues horses are noble but fragile. They break a leg, and that's the end of it. Another counters that camels may last longer, but they spit like demons, and you never forget the smell. A third pats his donkey and says proudly, "This beast may be slow, but he'll still be walking long after the others are bones." The donkey naturally brays loudly at that moment, as if demanding applause. You picture the competition as a kind of relay race. Sleek horses dashing across open plains, camels trudging through sandstorms, pigeons winging overhead, and then, quietly but consistently, donkeys picking their way across rocky paths. They may not win medals, but they don't drop out either. Here's your modern aside. It's like comparing delivery services today. Horses were your express overnight shipping, camels were bulk freight, pigeons were instant messaging, and donkeys? Donkeys were ground mail. Not flashy, but reliable, even if your package smelled faintly of hay when it arrived. One courier laughs as he recalls a time when a pigeon arrived at a fortress with a note so water-damaged it was illegible. The bird got credit for trying, but the donkey 2 days later brought a full letter, dry as parchment. Another shakes his head and mutters, "Still, if the Sultan wanted something fast, he wasn't waiting for donkey hooves." The group shrugs, accepting the truth. You realize the beauty lies not in one animal, but in the entire mosaic. The Ottoman Empire, sprawling across continents, relied on a patchwork system where each creature played its part. Horses sped, camels endured, pigeons darted, and donkeys, stubborn, steady donkeys, stitched the gaps together. Without them, communication would have been full of holes, like a poorly woven rug. The bells keep ringing, hooves tapping against the hard-packed dirt. You look at the donkeys again, their eyes half-lidded but their pace unwavering, and you can't help but think, slow rivals, fast rivals, winged rivals, it doesn't matter. The donkey always keeps going. And in the long game of empire, maybe that's the only thing that truly counts. The air is cooler now, evening shadows stretching across the road, when a courier pulls a leather tube from his saddlebag and taps it against his palm. "This one," he says softly, "goes to the governor's house in Konya by sunrise." His voice is serious, and suddenly you feel the weight of what's being carried. Not just parchment, but decisions, decrees, lives altered by ink and wax. The donkeys keep walking, oblivious, as though they're just hauling figs to market. But in reality, the scrolls bouncing at their sides carry the empire's pulse. Messages of war and peace, of taxes and treaties, of births and deaths. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Ottoman postal routes carried every type of correspondence, from imperial decrees sealed with the Sultan's tugra to mundane tax receipts. Critical military dispatches often had priority, moving faster through relay stations than everyday mail. Historians still argue whether secret intelligence, spy reports, coded messages, was formally integrated into the postal system, or if it traveled through separate channels. Either way, donkeys played their part, trotting steadily with both mundane and monumental news. A quirky tidbit. Some local governors were notorious for sneaking their personal shopping lists into official dispatches. One recorded example included orders for candied almonds, rosewater, and an especially fine kind of soap. Imagine a weary courier arriving after 3 days on the road, only to deliver an urgent military packet that turned out to be dessert supplies. You wonder if the donkey rolled its eyes. The caravan presses on, and you begin to imagine the kinds of messages each saddlebag might hold. One donkey carries news of a treaty that could bring peace to a border region. Another hauls an execution order sealed in crimson wax. A third might have nothing more thrilling than a merchant's invoice for 2 bolts of silk. The donkeys, of course, carry them all the same way, patiently, evenly, with no distinction between empire-shaking news and shopping errands. The couriers talk about this sometimes. One says he once delivered an order mobilizing troops to a fortress, only to later discover that his companion had carried on the very same day an invitation to a wedding feast. War and weddings, the man shrugs. The donkeys don't care which one they bring. For them, it's just another walk. Your modern aside, it's like when you open your email and see a message from your boss right next to a discount coupon for socks. Both arrive instantly, both clutter the same inbox. The Ottoman couriers just had a slower, dustier version of the same experience. You keep walking, and the evening deepens. Somewhere ahead, a governor might be pacing anxiously, waiting for news of a battle. Somewhere else, a bride's family might be arranging flowers, wondering whether the invitations will arrive in time. And in between, here you are, listening to the bells and watching the donkeys trudge along, carrying both futures and frivolities side by side. One courier pats his donkey's flank and murmurs, "This beast has carried more secrets than any minister." And he's right. These animals, stubborn and steady, were silent custodians of everything from military campaigns to the price of onions. You realize, with a kind of drowsy awe, that the Empire's stories were written not just by scribes in palaces, but also by the sway of scrolls against a donkey's ribs. The night draws closer. Stars appear above, faint at first, then brighter, as if they too are tiny messages flickering across the sky. The caravan does not stop. Urgent words, everyday notes, royal commands, all continue forward on hooves and bells, traveling deeper into the dark. The road feels quieter now, as if the donkeys themselves sense something changing in the air. You notice the couriers talk less, their voices lower, their jokes thinner. There's a sense of something winding down, because here, in the fading hooves of empire, you begin to glimpse what happens when even the most dependable system is slowly outpaced by time. Your mainstream historical fact. By the 19th century, the Ottoman postal system began modernizing rapidly under European influence. New technologies, railways, steamships, eventually the telegraph, reshaped communication. Historians still argue whether donkeys disappeared abruptly from postal service or faded gradually, lingering in rural areas where wires and tracks took longer to arrive. Either way, their central role was eclipsed, their bells drowned out by whistles and wires. Quirky tidbit? In some remote villages, people stubbornly kept using donkey post well into the telegraph era, partly because they distrusted electric messages. One elder supposedly muttered, "At least with a donkey you can see where your letter is." You imagine him glaring at a telegraph machine, suspiciously tapping it like it might explode. The couriers you walk with sense this future even if they don't say it outright. They pass a construction site where a new road is being widened, smooth enough for carriages instead of donkey hooves. One man spits into the dust and mutters, "Too wide for us, too fast." Another shrugs and says, "Empires change. The donkey doesn't care." And he's right. The animals graze at the roadside, blissfully unaware of obsolescence. You picture the contrast. A telegraph clicking in Istanbul, sending a message across miles in seconds, while a donkey plods along carrying 3-day-old news. Progress is undeniable, but you can't help feeling that something is lost in the trade. The rhythm of bells, the smell of hay, the quiet companionship of a courier and his beast, all replaced by wires strung across poles and the cold efficiency of machines. Here's your modern aside. It's not unlike watching landlines vanish in favor of smartphones. Faster, sleeker, more convenient. But you sometimes miss the clunky, tactile feel of dialing a rotary phone, don't you? Well, maybe not the rotary part, but you get the idea. The caravan trudges on, but you feel a subtle melancholy now. The courier's shoulders slump a little more. Their laughter carries less. They know their role will shrink, though they still walk, because the empire still needs them, for now. You hear one whisper to another. "When my son grows, there will be no donkey work left." The other only nods, eyes fixed on the horizon. The bells continue, steady, but somehow lonelier, echoing across the hills. You realize you're hearing the last generation of this sound in its full power. Soon, the Empire's heartbeat will be measured in clicks and wires, not hooves and brays. And yet, there's a strange comfort too, because even in decline, the donkeys remain themselves, steady, stubborn, unfazed by history. Empires may rise and fall, technologies may race ahead, but the donkey still pauses to nibble grass at the roadside. The world changes, but the rhythm does not. The sun sets, casting the road in deep gold. The caravan moves forward into the twilight, bells ringing softly. A fading sound, yes, but also a lasting one, echoing long after the Empire's own voice grows quiet. Night folds over the road once again, the stars sharp against a dark sky. You feel the weight of the journey in your legs, the monotony of bells etched into your ears, and yet also a strange tenderness for these creatures who have carried so much for so long. This is the twilight of the Ottoman postal donkeys, their hooves fading into silence as history turns its page. Your mainstream historical fact: by the late 19th century, official Ottoman postal reforms created a centralized service modeled on European systems, with printed stamps, urban post offices, and mechanized transport. Historians still argue how quickly rural donkey routes disappeared. Some claim they lingered into the early 20th century in Anatolian villages and mountain hamlets, where trains and wires took longer to arrive. Others believe they became purely local carriers of goods, rather than official messengers. Quirky tidbit: In one Anatolian town, elders fondly recalled donkeys still delivering personal letters well into the 1920s, long after the empire itself had dissolved. They even nicknamed one animal Old Postman because he stubbornly followed the same path every morning without being led, as though muscle memory had fused with duty. You walk with the caravan, but it feels different now. There's no urgency, no rush. The couriers talk softly about their families, about villages lit by oil lamps, about the food waiting at home. The donkeys seem calmer too, plodding steadily under lighter loads, their bells softer, almost like lullabies. One man murmurs that even if the empire forgets them, the donkeys will remain in memory as loyal companions. Another shrugs and says, "Empires vanish, but stubbornness never dies." You smile at that. He's right. Stubbornness is eternal, and few things embody it better than a donkey. Here's your modern aside. It's like the way vinyl records or handwritten letters still tug at our imagination. Technology may have outpaced them, but they never truly disappear. Donkeys, too, remain lodged in memory, carrying echoes of a slower, gentler rhythm of communication. The road grows quieter still. You hear only the whisper of wind in the grass, the occasional creak of a saddle, the soft crunch of hooves. It feels like history itself is sighing, gently tucking these animals and their couriers into the folds of memory. You realize that what you followed isn't just the story of a postal system. It's the story of endurance, of patience, of ordinary creatures doing extraordinary work without fuss or fanfare. Empires celebrated their sultans, their generals, their conquests. But without the donkeys, half of it might never have reached anyone's ears.
The caravan fades into the darkness, bells growing fainter, until all that remains is a soft echo, as though the empire itself is breathing out one last steady sigh. And so you let yourself drift, listening for that fading sound, knowing it still lingers, quiet, stubborn, eternal. Now the journey is done, and the donkeys rest. You can picture them, lying in quiet stables, tails tucked, ears drooping gently, as they drift into their own version of sleep. The couriers, too, finally off their feet, stretch out on mats, their bodies sinking into stillness after endless miles. The road outside is empty now, only the faint shimmer of stars above it, only the ghost of hooves in the dust. You slow your breathing, matching it to the rhythm you've been hearing all along. Each inhale is a hoof step, each exhale a bell fading into the night. The empire, vast and complicated, shrinks down to something simple and calming. The steady plod of animals who never hurried, never faltered, who carried words across mountains and valleys with patient hearts. Imagine yourself leaning against a warm donkey's side, feeling its steady breath. The world moves around you, but here there is only softness, only peace. The urgency of messages, the weight of history, the noise of empire, all of it dissolves into the quiet. What remains is comfort, a slow and grounding presence. Your eyes grow heavy now. The sounds fade further, until there is nothing left but silence. The caravan has passed, the scrolls are delivered, and the road belongs to night. You are safe, you are steady, you are carried gently into sleep, just as the empire was carried, mile after mile, on the backs of donkeys who asked for nothing more than a little hay, a little rest, and the freedom to be stubborn in their own time. Rest now, and let the bells fade into dreams. End of script, sweet dreams.